Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Salomon Brys. I'm Coding Koders founder. We'll see that a little bit later. This is Quick Start Native Mobile Kotlin Multiplatform Setup. So what I'm gonna be talking about here is just how to quick start a Kotlin multiplatform, meaning how do you create a project and what libraries do you use to be able to start writing as soon as possible on your business logic. So as I said, I created Coding Koders. It's a company, it's a European company that's we specialize in Kotlin multi-platform services, audit, consulting, and programming. And we are a Kotlin certified trainer by JetBrains. So we also have a training program. So if you ever need training about Kotlin or Kotlin multi-platform, please be sure to reach out. The other side of the coin of Coding Koders is the KODEINFramework, which is a Kotlin multi-platform framework. Basically, it is a set of libraries that run everywhere Kotlin can compile to. So it actually depends on the library. For example, the database doesn't work on web. It doesn't work with Kotlin.js. Yet, we are still investigating as to how we can make that happen. But all our other libraries are compatible with every Kotlin target. And I encourage you to check it out. And of course, today I'm going to be talking about a few of them. So what is Kotlin Multiplatform? Kotlin Multiplatform is actually not magic. It's a set of compilers that work together. And JetBrains is actually working at the moment on unifying those three compilers. You may have heard about the whole IR thing, frontend IR, backend IR. So the idea is that most of the compiler logic will be unified, and we will still have three different backends, and maybe four when WebAssembly comes out, Kotlin WebAssembly. So what's important to understand is that you have Gradle that configures your build, and then the Kotlin compiler runs multiple times for each of your targets. So each time you add a target, each time you need to compile to a target, then there's a Kotlin compiler that takes that in charge. So what is Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile? Essentially a Gradle plugin that allows you to put your sources in different places and configure the different compilers. It's not one thing, it's a myriad of little things that work together. And the kind of revolution that Kotlin brought to the multi-platform mobile scene is that they actually compile a jar for Java and a framework for iOS. So that means that you don't have to build your iOS application with JetBrains IDEs. You don't have to create weird Android configuration. You don't have to install a specific version of the OS. Once you can compile to a framework or to a jar, then the Android application team works with Android Studio, and the iOS application team works with Xcode. And so you have this architecture that comes inevitably, which is you have your business logic that's shared, and then you have two applications that handle the view, one for iOS and one for Android. And today I want to talk to you specifically about the business logic, because that's what Kotlin Multiplatform does. Point. That's what Kotlin Multiplatform does. And I want to give you tools and libraries to make sure that you can start writing your shared logic library, meaning jar or framework, as soon as possible. So it all starts with Gradle. Love it or hate it, you need to use it. I've seen both sides of this love-hate relationship. So you start with Gradle, and the first thing you need to do is to apply the Kotlin Multiplatform plugin. You also need to apply the Android library plugin, because Kotlin doesn't reinvent the wheel. If there's already a nice Gradle plugin that works for Android, then why not reuse it? And then you need to add your targets. So by adding an Android target, you'll create a jar that you can later import into your Android application project. And by using iOS, you need to define that you're going to create a framework, because by default, it's not a framework that it is going to be producing. It is a klib. Klib is the equivalent of a jar, but only for Kotlin Multiplatform. So that means that if you don't add these binaries framework, then you'll be creating a library, but that will only be consumable by other Kotlin Multiplatform projects, not by an actual iOS application. So you need to define that you want the framework. And then, of course, you need to configure your regular Android library stuff, so the min SDK and all that. So most of the application you'll be working on will be, you will need some kind of communication, some kind of persistence, and some kind of behavior abstraction. And once you have all the three modules, you probably need something to make all those modules work together. So without this, you'll probably need to reinvent the wheel, right? You'll need to create your own HTTP framework. You'll need to create your own persistence framework. So the good news is that there are a lot of solutions out there that already work with Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile. And I want to work through some of them. These are the ones that I recommend. These are by no means the only solution out there. Of course, there are other libraries that are very well done and documented. This is just my standard quick start setup. So let's start with Kater clients, because this is the go-to HTTP client for Kotlin Multiplatform. So Kater is initially a server library, and Kater client is the other side of this library. It's the HTTP client, and it works remarkably well as long as you stay within the framework of an HTTP request and a REST client, right? If you are trying to do weird stuff, such as adding SSL certificate, or using WebSockets, or opening your own SSL connections, or doing all that kind of weird stuff, then you'll probably have to get your hands dirty. But if you want to communicate with an HTTP client through a standard REST API, then Kater clients works remarkably well with Android and iOS, and even JS. So this is how you can create an HTTP request, but that gives you a response, and then you'll have to pass that response. And what's great with Kater client is that you can use Kotlin X serialization, which is a very hard word to say when you're not English native. So Kotlin X serialization is a library that creates everything that is needed to serialize and deserialize a class at compile time. So it bears no runtime workload, and everything is done through a compiler plugin at compile time. And once you have a serializable class, then you can actually install what's called the JSON feature inside HTTP client. And then here you can see that I'm not getting back a response, a classic response. I'm directly getting back a user. And that is that's the power of a Kater client working with serializable. So if you stay within the framework of a standard REST client, then I'm pretty sure Kater client is the library you should be using. So let's talk about persistence. And if you're a mobile developer, you're very acquainted to SQLite. And so SQLite is a library that initially worked on Android only and now works on multi-platform and has been working on multi-platform for quite a while. So basically how that works is that you need to define all your tables, all your data structures, all your queries inside a file, and then it will generate everything that's needed for you to get those type, execute those requests, create those tables. So SQLDelite is really useful, especially if you are used to working with SQLite. The only problem I have with SQLDelite is that, well, I don't have just one problem. I have two problems. The first problem is that, personally, I'm against using SQLite in mobile application. So this is only an opinion, of course, but I feel that SQL is very valid on servers and on paginated, tabularized data, but not on mobile, where we need more flexibility. And the other problem I have with it is that it kind of slows your build because it generates a lot of things. There's a compiler plugin and so on. So what I use personally is CodeinDB. I use it because I created it. So, of course, I'm a little biased. The idea behind CodeinDB is to offer a NoSQL database for Kotlin Multiplatform. And it's as simple as opening a database and putting entries inside the database and querying the database for those models. As you may have seen, the data itself is serializable because we're talking about a NoSQL database, so you need a way to transform that data into a document. It's a document-based NoSQL database. So that is done by serialization using Kotlin X serialization. And then on your model, you need to have an ID of any type. So here, for example, the ID is int. And then if you want to define indexes, then your models can do so. And so CodeinDB is a NoSQL database that works for Android and iOS. And its goal is basically to expose all the constraints that you can have with a traditional SQL database and offer the more flexibility possible. And it's also very, 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 very fast. And then you need a way to communicate with the actual application, with the views. So what I argue is that with Kotlin Multiplatform, you definitely should use model view intent. So you probably all know model view controller, MVC. Maybe you know MVP, model view presenter. Maybe you know MVVM. All those MV frameworks. MVI is an architecture patterns that which ideas is all about unidirectional data flows. So the controller or the presenter creates a model that is given to the view, and when the view needs to interact with the controller, it sends it an intent. Now, what's important to understand is that there is one type of model, and not many models for each subsection of your screen. There's one model that defines your entire screen. And if anything like the color of a button or anything changes, then you emit a copy of that model with what's changed. But the entire model is given back to the view. And that's immensely powerful, because all you have to do if you're using Jetpack Compose is to create a view, with a composable view, that gets a model, an input, and is provided a way to send an intent as output. That's all you need to do. And that's the entire channel of communication between Jetpack Compose and your shared library, right? You have one way down, one way up, no need for more. And because of the way declarative UI work, it's actually very optimized for Jetpack Compose and declarative UIs. And of course, you can do pretty much the same thing if you target iOS with Swift UI. You need to declare a view, which is a struct in Swift UI, and then you'll have a model as input and a way to send intent as output. So it's really easy to do. You don't even need a library, because all you need to do is maybe some Kotlin X flows or some functions. Or I've done it for application. It's like maybe 30 lines of code to have my own MVI engine running. And you don't have to be complex. But if you want to go the complex route, then MVI Kotlin has you covered. MVI Kotlin is the very complex way of doing MVI, but also the very correct way and very secure way. And with MVI Kotlin, you have reducers, you have stores, you have binders, and all that. And it's pretty complex, and it's kind of hard to get into it, to read the documentation, to understand what each part is doing. But once you understand that, it's actually very powerful. You can do time control, time travel, you can do a lot of things that you cannot really do with classic MVI if you don't invest the time in programming those features. So my opinion is, if you need something simple, if you're going for a simple application, use in-house MVI, just a few flows. If you need to create a complex application and you know that investing the time in learning this library will pay out in the long run, then try it out. It's a very good library. And finally, once you have all those modules, the MVI, the persistence, and the HTTP or something else communication, you need a way to architecture them all, to manage them all. And I use KODEINFramework. I use KODEINFramework because I created it, so of course I'm biased. The idea behind KODEINFramework is to create a DI framework that is very, very simple to use and that gets out of your way. Okay, so it's very simple. You want to bind a singleton, use bind singleton. You want to bind a provider, use bind provider. You want to get an instance, ask for an instance. It's really easy to use. It's not currently checked at compile time, but we are working on it with KSP. We are trying to work something out. And so it provides a lot of features that I'm not going to go into today, but it allows you basically to scope your dependencies, saying this is a singleton, so it will be the same for the entire application. This is a provider, meaning every time you need an instance, you need to recreate one. And the by keyword here is important. KODEINFramework is lazy by default, which means that it works seamlessly with Android on classes such as activity or fragments, where when the class constructor is called, then the component is not actually in the application. You need to wait for and create and all that stuff. And because it's lazy by default, and because you use by instance instead of equals instance, then it works seamlessly with those platforms. So here's my go-to start. This is mine. I use Kata Client, I use KODEINFramework and DI. I, of course, use Kotlin X coroutines, because what would my life be without it? But, of course, other possibilities are out there. Please find your own. And make sure to use amazing existing tools, because often what I hear about Kotlin Multiplatform when I pitch to it is there's not enough library out there. There's no ecosystem for Kotlin Multiplatform. We need to recreate everything. And that's getting less and less true. That's maybe a bit true, again, but that's getting less and less true. And most of the common use case are out there for you to grab. So you can use existing tools. And for the cases that exist, I'm not going to lie to you, where you will need to reinvent the wheel because that particular wheel doesn't exist for Kotlin Multiplatform, make sure to contribute back, because Kotlin Multiplatform, Kotlin Native, and the whole Kotlin ecosystem really needs your contribution. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.